Hello, I'm Dr. David Burr, and we're with Diane here at the Float Zone. Diane has been participating in a case study on traumatic brain injury and flotation therapy, and we've done 2 segments before this, and we're going to talk a little bit more about your float experiences during the first, second, and third segments of this case study, where we did 30 days in a row to begin, and then 3 times a week, and then twice a week, each for a month. And so, tell us a little bit about some of your most incredible float experiences or some impactful times that you had in the tank.
So a lot of those, some of the more interesting experiences happened probably between, say, float 15 and float 40. And in the previous segment that we did, I described that I feel like I had personal phases that I went through. The second phase, happening probably around float 15, we'll say, is when I really kind of entered this period where I was exploring my thoughts, my emotions. I was encountering the things that were nagging at me and bugging me in my daily waking life, which is something we all experience. And because it's this meditative state, it's just you there with your mind. And I had already gotten to the point where I was so experienced in floating that my body wasn't distracting me. And so I would encounter, say, one time a negative thought that had been looping and occurring maybe for a decade. Something, and I was able to identify it and stop and think, this doesn't serve me. I don't want to think this anymore. But my knowledge about neuroscience informs me that a lot of times we repeat thoughts because thought pathways are actually ingrained in the brain. And so I had this visualization come to me that there's this dug trench. This thought was a trench that was deeply dug out, and so easy for my thoughts to flow through it. And so I had this visualization of little workmen filling the trench up, like shoveling and filling the trench with dirt and kind of patting it closed, and then there being a train track on the top that normally would go in a certain direction, and then I switched the track to go in a different direction. And that it was kind of a playful moment, but it absolutely took me away from the negative thought. It distanced me and allowed me to let go of it. And after I changed the train track and went in another direction, I actually went in another direction. So it was pretty incredible. And there were a lot of times, I would say through all the experiences, particularly that, maybe 15 to 40, there were these experiences where I was actually encountering these normal things that would pop up in everyday life and plague me or trouble me or whatever, but I was getting the opportunity to actually witness them and experience them and detach from the connection and become, in what Buddhism describes and what people that talk about meditation describe, the observer of it. And some of these visualizations that I would go through to kind of shift or process or heal the things, some of them I would come up with in my own mind, and some of them I felt would come to me, which I don't really have an explanation for.
That's great. One of the things that you mentioned to me too is that your emotions seem to affect almost every other parameter of what we were tracking too, and that, tell me a little bit about how floating helped your emotions, whether they be anxiety or even self-esteem.
Yeah, so we would track my experience of levels of anxiety and self-esteem and motivation, and so we've got a lot of really interesting data around that. Some of the stuff I'm not consciously aware of day to day, but looking back at the data, it's really interesting to kind of see, maybe where I was in my mood or my level of anxiety compared to how my cognition felt like it was working. Memory, focus, my ability to organize my thoughts and kind of take them where I wanted to take them. And it became very evident over this process how immensely my emotional state, my level of depression, my level of anxiety, my level of self-esteem would impact my ability to think clearly and well. I mean, it was almost shocking, but it kind of, looking back, it's kind of obvious, you know, because I would imagine a lot of people are like this, but when you're down or you're struggling with something, it kind of consumes you, you know?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot in this study about sort of your new normal and where I am now, that concept of where I am now versus,
Right.
you know, you didn't really have a great idea of where you were when we first started this study. And so talk a little bit to us about this new sense of normal and where you are now.
Well, my sense of where I was before that was just fogged and struggling and pretty down. My experience of floating brought me awareness, a more objective sense of what my normal actually was. You know, as my awareness increased and my baseline shifted, it made me more objectively aware of where I had been. This really interesting kind of psychological and cognitive sense of wayfinding or dead reckoning, you know, which is a really cool concept, of knowing where you are based on where you've been. I would say that my new normal, the floating itself has contributed a lot to kind of increased energy levels, increased alertness. I think that my awareness that I've gained and achieved has allowed me and offered me a greater sense of kind of personal embodiment. I feel more rooted in myself.
Do you think, with regard to that, you're about to move to Hawaii? Did floating influence your decision to move to Hawaii?
The Hawaii thing has been in the works for some time, and I had been telling myself within 5 years or by 5 years I would want to move, and it's the 5th year about to be now. So it's not that floating made me come up with the idea, but I do think that it provided me this sense of awareness and this sense of personal agency and clarity and empowerment for me to land in a place where I felt confident that making such a drastic move was the right thing, and feeling capable of it. I mean, I'm stressed and nervous some, but really not, considering how big of a change it's gonna have on my life. I mean, I can't really take anything, and it's not by choice. I would rather take everything that I have.
Thank you. Do you have any other insights or advice for people suffering with traumatic brain injury and considering floating as part of their regimen?
I think that ultimately what this experience has offered me and allowed me is a better sense of understanding of what I'm going through and where I'm at. My own understanding and orientation around my condition and the challenges that I face, memory problems, focus problems, that sort of thing, I feel like affect everybody to one degree or another. My sense is that the struggles that I have with memory are just more exacerbated and more challenging than they are for the average person. So I really recommend, honestly, and I think that floating for a 30-day period can offer everyone and anyone incredible levels of personal insight. The way that meditation does. Although I think floating is like, you know, an hour a day for 30 days straight is maybe a year of attempt, or more than a year of attempted sitting meditation. When it comes to people that have suffered TBIs or concussions, floating is an incredible thing because it offers you a reprieve and a place for you to become more familiar with yourself and where you're at, and a sense of relation to your own state. That's what it offers mentally, or could offer mentally, in addition to all of the noted and documented effects of relaxation and rejuvenation and the detoxing with the magnesium that's in the actual salt. I mean, most of what we've talked about over these segments is my kind of personal awareness and experience with my time in the tank. There's a whole nother element of just the actual benefits that it offers. So I recommend it for everybody, particularly people that are struggling with emotional issues or cognitive difficulties.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of this, and we're going to follow you to Hawaii because we know that you're going to be continuing floating in Hawaii.
Which I'm very excited about.
Yes, and so we'll check in with you and continue this series in the future. So thank you very much, Diane.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been life-changing.